I'm Claire Beecroft. I'm the Deputy Director of Learning and Teaching at SHAR, and I'm usually the host for these SHAR mini masterclasses. So thank you for joining us today. Just before we get started, a few kind of basics in terms of navigating your way around Blackboard Collaborate, just in case you haven't joined us before. I think I'm just going to have to move the poll out of the way. So you should be looking at a screen that looks something like this. So you should have at the bottom a little icon that'll either probably have your initials in it or an image of yourself if you've uploaded one. You should have an icon of a microphone, a video, and the raised hand icon. The way we normally run these masterclasses is that when we take questions, we ask you to post those in the chat box. But if you do want to ask a question using your microphone, you can, but we do that after the presentation is finished, and I also sort of moderate the questions and read out the ones that have come in via the chat. So you can leave your microphone and video switched off during the session, but if you want to ask a question using your microphone, you just click on the little microphone icon to activate it when you're ready. If you need to get our attention for any reason, you can use the raise hand icon to let us know. So if you're having any sort of audio or video issues, that's worth knowing about. You should also see a little purple tab probably in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, and if you click on that, that will make the chat panel appear. So you click on the little speech bubble icon there and the chat box will appear, so that's where you can type in your questions. Sometimes people like to make comments as well as the session's progressing, and that's fine, you can put those in the chat box. But if you have a question that you'd like Sam to answer, can you just put Q in front of it so we know that it's a question and not just a comment that you're wanting to make on the presentation. The little cog in the panel that appears when you click on the purple tab, that will open your settings, and in there you can change the things like the microphone and the video that the session is using. So if you're having any audio issues or something like that, then it's worth having a look in your settings. So yeah, that's basically the basics for using Collaborate today. I just wanted to say a couple of things before Sam begins her presentation. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate all those of you who've been before and those of you who are here for your first time today, taking time out to join us for our mini masterclass. Just a reminder that we have master's programs in both public health and human nutrition, subjects that are obviously very close to the subject of the masterclass today. I will put these links in the chat box later on so you can click on them, but we do have a master's diploma and postgraduate certificate in both human nutrition and public health. We have a Facebook page that we use to talk about both the teaching and the research that goes on at SHAR, so you can find out more about SHAR there. And also our short course unit has various online short courses coming up. We have courses in systematic reviews and meta-analysis, our introduction to starter and real-world evaluations and rapid review methods are the most sort of immediate ones that are upcoming, but we have a full program running across the summer and into the end of this year, so you can find more about those at the link there, and again I'll put that in the chat box. And then we've got more masterclasses coming up over the next few months. Our next one, so our June mini masterclass, is with Dr. Philip Powell and Dr. Donna Rowan, and that's about measuring and valuing health for children and adolescents. Again, I'll post the link in the chat box, but just to let you know, that's the next one. And then after that, in July, we have Dr. Emily Wood talking about supporting a mentally healthy NHS workforce, obviously a very important topic at the moment, particularly as we hopefully move out of the time of extreme pressure on NHS services. So that will be our July mini masterclass, so you can sign up for both of those now. But today we're welcoming Dr. Sam Caton, who's going to be talking about promoting vegetable intake in preschool children, barriers and potential solutions. Sam has been at SHAR since 2013, I hope I'm correct about that. She's a biological psychologist with an interest in obesity, appetite regulation and nutrition. Her first degree was in psychology at Leeds University, and then a master's degree in human nutrition here at Sheffield, followed by a PhD at the University of Liverpool. She's held postdoctoral positions in Germany and the United States and worked at the University of Leeds before taking up her first lectureship at the University of Bradford. And as I say, she joined SHA as a senior lecturer in October 2013. Her research interests are promotion of healthful eating in preschool children, infant feeding behaviour and effect of alcohol on appetite and body weight regulation. And Sam also teaches medical students at SHA, because we teach a range of programmes to first-year medical students, as well as on some of our other master's programmes, and supervising both master's and PhD dissertation students. So at that point I will hand over to Sam. I'm just going to switch over the slides. So as I say, if you want to ask questions, if you can, post them in the chat with a Q in front just to indicate it's a question, not a comment. But if you want to ask your question in person, you can do so, but we will take all questions at the end of Sam's presentation. So Sam, I'll hand over to you now, okay?
Thanks, Claire. I'm just launching my video. Hello everybody, thanks for the introduction, Claire. It makes me realise that I keep going in full circles with my academic career. I'm about to go in full circles as well. So the work that I'm going to talk to you about today is some of the stuff that we've been doing on promoting vegetable intake in children. And there's an element of that circularity there as well, because when I say that I've been doing, I use that term loosely, it's work that's been carried out, you know, by a number of people, and I've been fortunate to work in really good research teams. So I work with people like Professor Marion Hetherington at University of Leeds. So Marion was also my supervisor. Dr. Pam Bertil Blundell, who helped us with all the statistics. Pam's a senior lecturer at Leeds. Dr. Joanne Cecil, University of St Andrews, Dr. Sarah Hearn at Bradford Institute of Health Research, and many, many more. I've got the thanks after that. But before I start, I just want to make it clear that all this work has been a real collaborative team effort. So I use the term I loosely. Okay, so I will move on with the talk. Let's have a look. Okay, so I just want to start off by asking how many portions of fruits and vegetables you usually consume per day. So Luke's just launched the poll there, so thanks, Luke. Okay, we've got around 8 people that'd rather not tell us, so I'll just show the responses here. So we've got quite a large proportion of you actually that are consuming 5 or more a day, so that's fantastic to see. It's probably why you're all here today, because you've got a vested interest in healthful diets and consumer healthful diets, and maybe you work in this field of research or otherwise to do with food. That's really encouraging to see from an N of, I mean, we've got 34. Okay, so what's so special about vegetables, and why have we focused on the promotion of vegetables over the last, gosh, around 13 years, I think, that we've been doing this? Primarily, vegetables are quite special because they're low in energy density, so this means kilocalories per gram. You know, we need to have effort into reducing the energy density of adults and indeed children's diets, because we're seeing a rapid increase of children with overweight and obesity, and indeed adults as well. So vegetables are special because they can reduce the energy density of a meal. Following on from this, they're really nutrient dense, so they contain a complex mixture of phytochemicals such as flavonoids, carotenoids, lycopenes, you know, things that give fruits these really, really nice bright colours. And of course, you know, you'll all be aware that these have health beneficial properties as well. So fruits, vegetables contain fibre and vitamins. And it's really important that we have a good mixture of vegetables and indeed fruit in our diet. And labour this point because actually what we're seeing of late is that people's dietary quality is not getting better, it's getting worse, and we've seen this more throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased use of food banks. Whilst that's attending to food insecurity, you know, we're not seeing any real efforts at the moment to look at nutrient security. So food security is making sure people have access to food. In the definition it talks about good nutrition, but actually I prefer the term access to good nutrition and nutrient security. So overall we're not seeing at a population level that people's diets are improving at the moment. If anything, that they seem to be declining. We know that vegetables have got significant health benefits, so there's lots and lots of research on this. So it has significant health benefits in terms of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, certain cancers. We know that diets that are rich in vegetables and indeed fruit have positive effects on people's mental health and cognitive performance. There's also a significant impact on human and planetary health when diets are rich in vegetables and fruit. And we're constantly seeing nowadays how we should be all switching to a more plant-based diet, and how this is going to have beneficial properties for our health as well as planetary health. But there's just one problem, is that it can only happen if we get people to eat them, and probably eat them in the correct form, because whereas we're seeing quite a lot of a shift towards people moving onto vegan diets or vegetarian diets, we've got to keep an eye on how much processed plant-based foods people are consuming as well. So we'll need to have efforts in order to get people to eat vegetables as they come. So we've got a huge problem, and I've already alluded to this, is that people are not consuming sufficient amounts of vegetables in the diet. So you may be familiar with current UK guidelines from Department of Health and World Health Organization that we should be consuming 5 a day. And for an adult this translates into around 400 gram. And this is for fruits and vegetables, sorry, not just vegetables. But if you look at the Health Survey for England and other international nutrition and health surveys, they all tend to tell the same story. So both adults and children are not consuming sufficient amounts. We know that around 83% of children are not consuming the recommended 5 a day, and we've still got around 10% of children that are not consuming any fruits and vegetables per day. And so whilst around 9–10% sounds small, it's actually not. You know, that's still a huge proportion of the population that are not consuming any fruits and vegetables in the diet. And as I mentioned as well, you know, habitual diets tend to contain too much processed food, a lot of meat, particularly processed meat, and it's high in discretionary items. So items that are got very little value in terms of nutritional content. So then, you know, we start to ask the question of why don't children eat sufficient amount of vegetables? And one of the big reasons that crops up all the time, and again, not just in UK data sets, we see it in data sets from China, from Japan, different European countries, is that intakes of fruits and vegetables tend to correlate with income. So the more affluent you are, there's an increased likelihood that you consume more fruits and vegetables compared to people who are less affluent. So that's a huge problem right there. It may be due to the low availability in homes and schools, and so, you know, availability in the home may be related to financial aspects and affordability and accessibility as well, because we always assume that people have got access to supermarkets, but, you know, indeed people don't. You know, some people may only have access to the local shop where there's a price premium and low availability of fresh fruits and vegetables. There may be low availability in schools, again going back to the fact that children, you know, frequently report that they don't like vegetables and therefore don't eat them. And then there's the issue of waste. There's also abundance of alternative foods, and so you only have to look in a supermarket, typical supermarket, whereby, you know, you see the selection of fruits and vegetables, and then you go down the next aisle and there's lots of, you know, high energy, dense, tasty food there. And when given the choice, some people, if they're not very health conscious, or indeed, you know, don't have the money to spend on fresh fruits and vegetables, you know, you opt for the alternative there. So there's an abundance of alternative foods on offer that may compete with the consumption of fruits and vegetables. Children also report not liking them, and they report not liking them because of the texture. You know, some vegetables are fibrous or a little bit slimy. You know, children may report that they don't like the appearance of vegetables, particularly green ones. They may not like them because they're actually low in energy density, and children do require quite a lot of energy to support the growth velocity. Get my words right. And then, of course, a lot of vegetables do taste bitter. And this is what I'm going to talk about today, is how do we learn to like vegetables, and how do children learn to like bitter tastes? So it might be a familiar face that if you've looked after children, or you've got children, that you've seen this. So, you know, you give children vegetables for the first time and you see the squinting of the eyes and the pursing of the lips and the wrinkling of the nose. So this is a typical facial expression that we see in children that don't like foods very much, particular foods very much, should I say. Okay, so before I go any further, so we're thinking about taste. I'd like to ask again in another poll, which taste do you like most? So if you had a preference, you know, would you opt for sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, which is a savoury taste? I'll just launch that poll and clear it. So if you could just bob in there, which ones you prefer? Luke, I'm not sure if I've done anything wrong with this poll, but it's not going up or down, or if anybody's not voting.
Let me, should be okay. Clear it.
Show response.
Yeah,
Here we are.
maybe we're, yeah, we're there.
We're both trying to press buttons at once. Is it not letting you vote, Jean? Try it again now, Jean. It should work. No, sorry, it's not working for you, Jean. Maybe you want to bob in the chat which one you prefer.
I could just stop it and restart it and see if that helps. People will have to vote again. But...
we can carry on, Luke.
Okay.
I can carry on. If I show responses here. So we've got quite a lot of people choosing sweet taste, just a few with salty, and a few with savoury. So this is quite interesting. To be completely honest, when I launched this, I expected to see a more even distribution, but it seems that people, you know, the majority of people are still preferring sweet tastes. And so with that, this takes us on to thinking about how does taste preference develop. And this takes us on to the work of Steiner in the late 1970s. So their work focused on looking at facial responses in response to different tastes. So we've got some very young babies here that were given different tastes of liquid in the mouth. So in the first panel here, and just click on that pointer, we've got babies at rest, which is a control. Then the babies were given water, sweet solution, sour solution, and bitter solution. And the team then observed the facial responses from these babies. So what we can see here in response to the sweet taste, that the baby's looking quite content. The babies are almost smiling in response to this. So, you know, we can agree that the babies look really quite content and happy here. And then in response to the sour taste, you see the pursing of the lips. And then in response to the bitter, you see the gaping of the mouth and the tongue protrusion. So the babies that were involved in these studies and then subsequent studies by other research groups, we see this universal reaction across lots and lots of different infants, offered sweet, sour and bitter tastes. And this led the researchers to say that actually, you know, babies have an innate liking of sweet foods. And they concluded that it was innate because it's seen in non-human primates. So you can see here in orangutans and rhesus monkeys. So you see the gaping response in response to the bitter solution, and then the smile and the pleasant-looking baby and quite a happy orangutan here in response to the sweet solution. So this is the work of Steiner, if anybody's interested. Actually, on the papers, there is some links to some of the videos that they made, so it's really quite cool to look at. So we know that infants demonstrate hedonic responses to sweet taste and aversive reactions to bitter, sour and salty. So with this, you know, we know that infants have to learn to like non-sweet tastes. And why are we interested in this in the context of vegetables and learning to like vegetables? It takes us back to quite a lot of vegetables have bitter tasting compounds. Yeah, so there's an element of learning here, learning to accept these bitter tasting compounds and learning to accept vegetables. Or should I say learning to like. So how do we learn to like? We can learn to like in utero, where before babies are born. We know that babies swallow around 500 ml to a litre of amniotic fluid per day, particularly in the last trimester. And we know that the amniotic fluid's influenced by the maternal diet. So there are certain compounds that are ingested by the mother that pass through into the amniotic fluid. So things such as garlic, vanilla, you know, there are a few compounds that have been confirmed that pass through into the amniotic fluid. Not all dietary components do this. And to my knowledge, we still don't have a full profile of which ones pass through and which ones don't. And I'm guessing this is because we've got constraints on what we can actually do with humans, but there is still a lot of animal literature out there. So the in utero environment provides early taste exposure, and this is some of the very early work that I found on this. So I've called this Old Wives' Tales and Strange Spelling Newborns. And this is a really, really nice set of case studies if you're interested in this. And it's a report from a hospital in Israel. And they wrote up the case notes of some newborn babies that were born with really distinct smells. And so this is important to clinicians when babies are born, because it can actually indicate that there's infection there and that they need to treat the babies and the mothers pretty fast. So once they established that these babies were fine and that the mothers were fine, they then started to prompt and ask more questions. And the really wonderful thing about this research is that the babies were born smelling of certain compounds in the last meals that the mothers consumed prior to giving birth. So I'm guessing that this is the foundation for a lot of the experimental work that then went on moving forward. So Julie Minella's done some really nice work on this, on getting mothers in the third trimester to consume carrot juice, and then some mothers who consume carrot juice during lactation. And then they measured acceptance of a carrot-based cereal when the babies were born. Compared to controls, and what they found is increased acceptance when mothers had consumed the carrot juice in the third trimester and during lactation compared to controls. So we know that the in utero environment constitutes a taste exposure. The next area that influences taste preference development is during the breast and bottle feeding. And I've not really done much work on this, although we did always ask if infants were breast or bottle fed. So as I mentioned, there is what we call chemical continuity in terms of what the mothers consume in the diet when they're pregnant. The compounds go through into the amniotic fluid. And then similarly, when mothers breastfeed, there are certain compounds that then will go into the breast milk. And so the babies get the advantage of being exposed to quite a variety of different tastes compared to bottle-fed babies. You know, bottle-fed babies tend to have one milk, and parents will stick with this milk, or caregivers will stick with this milk until the child's ready to be given table food. So we do know that babies that are breastfed are more likely to accept vegetables during the weaning period compared to those that are not. So this, in terms of taste preference development only, it does confer an advantage. Although there is a lot of work out there looking at bottle-fed babies who are given cow's milk formula or specialist formula such as protein hydrolysate. And again, Julia Minella's done some really, really neat work on this, looking at what formulas children were given and what foods they like and accept during weaning period, and indeed up to 5 years. So for example, Julia did work on infants that were given protein hydrolysate, which is quite sour and quite bitter, and they looked at taste preferences when the children got a little bit older, and these children still preferred the more sour and bitter tasting foods that were, and so they offered them such as sour and bitter apple juices compared to a sweet one, so on and so forth. So if you're interested in this, then Julia Minella's also done a lot of work on this. So moving on to the next time period that we have always found fairly, well, not fairly interesting, very interesting, is the complementary feeding period, which is also known as the weaning period. This time in a child's life is really important because it's when healthful food habits are formed. It's when children establish their food repertoire. So we know from Sophie Nicolaus at INRA in France, her work, she did a really nice study looking at what food children liked around age 2 to 3. And this actually tracked on to adulthood when people were around 20. So if you can imagine that actually the food repertoire is not very good during the complementary feeding period, then this is quite a lot of years where people may be missing out on consuming really important nutrients, fibre, so on and so forth. So this is why we focused on the complementary feeding period. So the work that one of the first pieces of work when I was at the University of Leeds with Sarah Ahern and Professor Marion Hetherington, we looked at the use of vegetables in the weaning period. And so this study, we did a questionnaire, and then we also did some interviews as well with mostly mums. And we asked mothers, you know, how do you get your children to eat vegetables? And so the main response from the mothers that we interviewed were, well, you know, either we just keep offering them or we hide them. And so we refer to this as vegetables by stealth. So mums were chopping up the vegetables really, really small and hiding it in food like mashed potato or pasta sauces for the children to consume. And we were kind of thinking, well, okay, if children are given vegetables in this way, do they ever learn that they're actually eating a courgette or a mushroom or an onion, so on and so forth? And we thought quite a lot about this and the importance of it. You know, is it important that children physically see what they're consuming rather than it being hid? But of course, when it's been hidden in certain foods, children are still getting the nutritional properties of the vegetables. And actually, there's a lot of peace of mind for mum there as well that it's happening. So I don't think it's something that we should not advise, because there's lots and lots of benefits to it. We subsequently know as well that, you know, that when children see what foods that they're consuming, get to interact with the foods, you know, play with them, maybe an educational component. So Dr. Chandni Nekit-Singh, previously Shah, did some really, really nice work on this, looking at books given to children to promote vegetable intake, as well as exploring the vegetables themselves. So I've mentioned as well that, you know, a lot of mums said to us, well, actually, I just keep offering them. I don't pressure the children to eat them. I just keep putting them on the plate in the hope that one day they'll consume them. And so this is what we were really interested in, is this idea of just keep offering them, and repeatedly expose the children to vegetables. So this moves us on to some of the potential solutions. So what can we do about it? How can we get children to consume more vegetables? And there's a wealth of information and research out there looking at repeated exposure, and we know that it's a really successful way of getting children to consume vegetables. Emma repeatedly exposed a son to cucumber. Brilliant, Emma. So repeated exposure, we know from the very early work by Leanne Birch that children require, you know, around 10 to 15 exposures to learn to like food, which feels quite a lot, but it's actually not. Although we know from the literature and talking to mums that actually we're pretty quick to give up on offering food to children. And there are many, many reasons for this. One, you know, we make a quick decision about how children don't like things based on the faces that they pull. There may be another aspect of this, such as, you know, can people afford the waste that this actually creates? But nonetheless, we do know that it's a really, really effective way of getting kids to eat more vegetables. And this is grounded in what we call, well, I say we, us psychologists call a mere exposure effect. And this was coined by Zients in 1968. And it basically refers to the fact that if we keep exposing people to certain stimuli, then over time we learn to accept it. I think there's a nice example of this. If somebody buys somebody a really horrible picture and you hang it up, and the first few times you walk past this picture and you think that actually this is horrendous, but the more you walk past it, the more you look at it, then you think actually it's not too bad. So Luke's just commented it works for music. Actually, that's a really nice example, Luke, as well. You know, we often hear new songs and we think, you know, gosh, that's awful. And then as you're repeatedly exposed to it, you learn to like it. Harry Styles, I never knew that, Luke. And then also with food as well, we've got the learned safety hypothesis from Paul Rozin in the early 70s. And this describes how children may steer away from certain foods, such as vegetables, because they have that bitter tasting compounds in there that might indicate actually that this is not a good food to consume. So it's got an evolutionary adaptive responses to it avoid that. But once you've consumed the food, you know that there's no adverse consequences of it, and then you learn that actually that food is safe to consume. And this is a typical example of how we would design an intervention looking at repeated exposure. So we've got simple repeated exposure here. So for example, if you wanted to get children to eat more carrots, then you just repeatedly expose them to carrots across time. And of course, this can be mixed with low variety and high variety. So a lot of Andrea Meyer's work is focused on this, and I do believe that I've actually taken these vegetables from her piece of work. So you can have repeated exposure, low variety and high variety. And some of the work that's come out on looking at this says that actually variety is really good if you do it within within the day, rather than providing, for example, carrots over 3 days and pumpkin and then green beans and then artichoke. So over the course of our work, there's one thing that's kept cropping up, is that repeated exposure is constantly effective at increasing intake. So we've got examples of studies down here that we've carried out over the years. One interesting thing that did come out of the work is that not all children respond the same. And this is important because we assume that we develop good interventions and they work for everybody. But then, you know, we've also to take a reality check here, is that we're not all the same, and life would be pretty boring if we were all the same. So children don't all respond in the same way to the same intervention. So we know that younger children, so we categorise these as less than 2 years, are more accepting of novel vegetables, and they're less fussy. Older children, so over around 2 years, are less accepting and more fussy. And this is because children around age 2 to 3 tend to go into what we call the neophobic phase, where even children will start rejecting foods that they previously loved and consumed in abundance before. And when you talk to parents, you know, most parents will report this to some smaller or bigger extent. But what we do know is that repeated exposure is still effective for fussy children. So it might appear a little bit more of a challenge, but actually repeated exposure still does work. We've also looked at repeated exposure with variety in different contexts, and we know that variety promotes food intake. And of course, we all know that when we go, well, when we're allowed to go to buffets and to people's houses and parties, and there's an array of food on offer, we tend to eat more than what we ordinarily would do, because there's lots of different foods on offer, and we've always got room for cake and dessert. But in these studies where we've offered variety, again, it came back to the fact that we were seeing that repeated exposure is still very effective, but the effects of variety tends to be mixed. So in this study here that we carried out, we offered the children a variety of vegetables, but within the variety we had vegetables in there that some of the children, they were novel and not liked by the children, and so the children got incredibly unhappy that we'd put carrot sticks in with radishes. You know, so the children really liked the carrot sticks, but they were upset that the radishes were touching the carrot sticks. And, you know, for example, you see that contamination effect. So the point is that we need to be careful with variety, that variety works when the children like the food, but mixed effects when the vegetables are novel. Moving on from working with very young children, we recently designed a feasibility study to look at what happens when you swap high energy dense snacks for fruits and vegetables. And this was part of Dr. Sophie Reale's work. Sophie now works at Sheffield Hallam University. So this was carried out as part of Sophie's PhD in a larger grant that we were on. I think Maxine Sharps is in the audience as well. So hello Maxine, Maxine worked on that grant as well. So we recruited parents of preschool children in Sheffield, and basically we had two groups where we got one set of parents to give half of their usual portion size of high energy dense snacks. So we're talking cookies, we're talking sweets, we're talking biscuits and so on and so forth. And then the other half, we said, well, take those away and replace these with fruits and vegetables that are liked and familiar to the children. And we actually found really nice effects with both. So whichever one you do, if you cut in portion sizes in half, you're half in the amount of sugar that children are consuming. If you replace them, then we found this nice increase in fruit and vegetable intake. And what was really good is that actually when the children weren't given these high energy dense snacks and they had it replaced with fruit and vegetables, you know, it was really acceptable to the children. And to the parents indeed, because when we first talked to parents about implementing this, surprisingly, you know, a lot of parents were quite hesitant about not giving children treat foods and also not letting children have the full bag of treat foods. And we know that, you know, very young children are given portion sizes way in excess of what, you know, what they should be given. I'm not going to say what they need because, you know, in terms of nutrition, children really don't need these high energy dense snacks, although there is part of me that thinks that actually, you know, they taste really good, and, you know, we do enjoy them. So children, you know, are given them and do enjoy them. So there's other evidence-based methods of getting children to eat more vegetables. We've incorporated some of these things in the work and work moving forward. So providing children with tangible rewards. So Dr. Lucy Cook at UCL works a lot on this. So we all know that children are quite responsive to a sticker. So this is a tangible reward for children, getting children to actually try vegetables. You know, there's some evidence to suggest that offering a little bit of choice and engaging them in preparation methods can be effective. Gardening and education components, eating as a family. This falls into sort of social learning and modelling and seeing other people consume foods. And this always reminds me of a lot of anecdotal evidence I hear from parents about when they talk about their children that go to nursery, and, you know, they get that little slip brought home with them, and, you know, it'll say little so-and-so's eaten a banana today, and parents are incredulous about this because, you know, as far as they know, their child doesn't like bananas, but obviously the child's eating bananas because other people are eating bananas at nursery. We can also offer larger portion sizes as well to children. So if we offer slightly larger portion sizes of vegetables, then there's some evidence to suggest that children will consume more than when smaller portion sizes are offered, particularly if you offer them as a first course. When children are hungry, and Professor Barbara Rolls has done a lot of work on this as well. There are also other wider food environment solutions, such as changing advertising, which I believe we've recently heard news of a ban on certain foods being advertised after before watershed, which is good to hear. You know, other wider food environment solutions would be to attend to the price, different policies and different guidelines regarding how we feed children and very young children. So there's lots of ways that we can promote vegetable intake in children, and some of the main lessons learned that we've had is that we need to understand the learning process. You know, when does it start? When do children start to learn to like? And there's some examples of some nice reviews there. We need to introduce vegetables early, so in the weaning period. Professor Marion Hetherington's done some really nice work at Leeds about introducing vegetables really early, and there's a really nice study available where small amounts of vegetable taste were put in the milk. Again, I'm not recommending that we make any recommendations about this because it veers off from what the recommendations are, but nonetheless it's a really, really nice study of proof of principle. And this idea, I believe, came from the fact that in France, when mothers make up the milk formula, they use the water that vegetables have been boiled in to make up the formula, and so this varies the taste of the milk. We know that we need to keep offering vegetables, keep repeatedly exposing children to vegetables. We need to offer variety. And of course, we can swap high energy dense snacks. What do we need to go on and look at next in all of this research? We absolutely need to address the issues of waste, because we know that when you're engaging in repeated exposure, you know, a lot of waste happens. You know, and this is not good. It's not good from a financial perspective. It's not good from an environmental perspective. We know that every time we scrape food into the bin, it goes off into landfill and contributes to CO2 emission. We need to address the problem on a global scale. This is a problem that persists in many different countries, in many different contexts. And I suppose that one of the important things is actually we need to seek to improve the diets of adults. You know, young children don't go off and feed themselves. You know, caregivers are the gateway for nutrition. And so improving an adult's diet will hopefully then feed down into improving children's diets, because we know that there's a relationship between the types and amounts of foods that people consume and what, you know, what are the types and amounts of foods that children consume. So moving on quickly, because we're running out of time, is how have we taken this work forward? So we're currently carrying out work in China and this is a grant that's led by Professor Yoon Gong at University of Leeds. So this is addressing micronutrient deficiencies associated with double burden of childhood malnutrition in China. And the work that I'm specifically involved in is using repeated exposure to facilitate uptake of a product called Yin Yang Bao, which is a micronutrient supplement. We're thinking about repeated exposure because there's lots of reports from mothers that the babies don't like this, and it contains an important source of iron in particular. So mothers offer it, they think that the child doesn't like it, and then they stop offering it. And actually in rural areas of China, it's really where you know, dietary diversity is low, it's really important that the children get these vital nutrients. Also in another rural area of China, we're looking at the acceptability of biofortified vegetables in preschool children. So biofortified vegetables are vegetables that have been nutrient enhanced. So we'll be using vitamin A enhanced sweet corn with these children, and hopefully, you know, we'll be comparing the taste against standard sweet corn and looking at how much children consume. Another big project, and this is the last one that I'm going to talk about because we'll be out of time. So this is the newly funded H3 project. So this is called Healthy Soil, Healthy Food and Healthy People. The two PIs on this project are Professor Peter Jackson from Geography and Professor Duncan Cameron from Animal and Plant Science at the University of Sheffield. And this is a massive multidisciplinary research program. The outlines there, I'm not going to go through it. Basically, the role in SHAR is work package 4. So I'll be leading this, and what we're hoping to do is to grow some nutrient-enhanced vegetables, utilising some novel technologies that will happen earlier on in the grant. And we'll be looking at acceptance and usability and bioavailability of the nutrients over the 3 years. So that project starts in January 2023. So again, just to acknowledge all of these wonderful female scientists that were involved in this work over the years. And thank you to all for showing up today and listening, and I've seen the comments coming in, so I look forward to having a quick read and answering any questions that you might have to ask.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Claire.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
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 Okay, great. Sorry, I had to have a quick switch of headphones. Thanks for that, Sam. I can see some questions have come in on the chat. One from Albert has resonated quite a lot with people, I think. He asks, in a sociable society such as ours, how do you protect your child from repeated exposure to unhealthy foods served at parties from friends and family, for example? If you repeatedly expose your child to fruit and vegetable intake at home, it appears that in situations like this, they may be unavoidable and may also increase their risk for future consumption of salty, sweet and unhealthy foods as a result of how addictive they are. So yes, the age-old challenge of children going to a lot of birthday parties and eating things that you'd rather they didn't.
Thanks for that question, Albert. Albert's my PhD student, so it's always good to be challenged by your students. My answer to this and my personal opinion is that you don't. We know we've a lot of our work also focuses on looking at different parenting practices around food. And actually when you start restricting food intake to your children, you make them want things even more. So there's some classic studies out there looking at restricting foods, and what we find is when you restrict children from eating foods in a strict sense, you increase the importance of that food. So when they are given access to it, they'll naturally overconsume it. On the converse, I wouldn't say, keep snacks around and let young children have access to them all the time. It's about a happy medium. And, you know, and when we're giving dietary advice to adults as well, you know, I'm very much anti this restrictive food intake. You know, food's food, you know, and you know, we all like a bit of chocolate now and again. We all like some crisps now and again, but in moderation. Moderation is quite difficult to determine for preschool children, actually, because if you look on the back of a lot of high energy dense products, you know, there is no recommendation of portion sizes for small children. And that's probably because, you know, there's a lot of people out there that think that, you know, young children shouldn't be given these. They don't form part of a healthful diet. There's no nutrients in them, so they shouldn't be given them. I think that Cadbury's have started to do it. But, you know, maybe if industry was a little bit helpful and provided some guidelines on this, then this would stop people from giving the children big grab bags full of crisps and jumbo packets of chocolate buttons to consume. So it's a fine line. So it's a really nice question, that, Albert. I wouldn't recommend being very restrictive with children, you know, everything in moderation. We've got a question following from that from Lisa, which has just made me chuckle. Grandparents are the worst for this. I agree, we see this a lot. But I've got a PhD student, Colette Ma, who is doing some amazing work at the moment looking at how grandparents feed their grandchildren. And actually, overall, and now it could be due to the grandparents that we're recruiting, you know, they are very clued up about the rules that parents want to stick to and what they actually do. We've got a study that's is just under revision, actually, looking at the sorts of foods grandparents feed the children, and it's not as bad as what we thought. But I took a personal perspective on this at first from knowing what my mum used to feed my daughter, and it felt horrendous at times. But actually, again, the bigger picture of it is that, you know, it probably wasn't that bad.
Okay, thanks for that, Sam. There was a question, there was a bit of discussion about UK school meals, and I think someone was asking about, you know, whether meals were provided in school, and I think there was a bit of chat about that, but there was a sort of question within it, which was, is there kind of any evidence that fruit and vegetables given at school sort of encourage vegetable intake?
I mean, another one of my PhD students, thanks for this, Mariella. Yeah, children in the UK given ready meals. I mean, you know, there are standards there that schools are supposed to stick to. Whether they do or they're not, I'm not totally convinced. As far as ready meals, I've never heard of that. I've never heard of children being given ready meals. The foods might be prepared and brought in by an external company, but I've never heard of ready meals being offered in schools or nurseries.
Okay, thanks for that. Marion asked, given that vegetables are not well liked by children and they generally don't eat them as snacks, how can we encourage greater intake at meal times and elsewhere in the diet? I wonder if this goes back a little bit to what you were talking about sort of mushing things up, hiding things versus being able to see them.
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, that's just one strategy, is vegetables by stealth, and actually, you know, I don't think that there's an issue with that, providing that children do eventually learn to eat vegetables. I mean, some of the nice studies that have addressed this from Barbara Rose's group is that the children are offered, you know, vegetables that they do like and are familiar with as a starter. You know, so give the children the vegetables when they're hungry. You know, children will eat vegetables as snacks. It may take some time. But they will, you know, children do learn to like them. So it's not that they don't like them and they're not going to eat them. You know, repeated exposure, make them familiar with the vegetable. Pair it, you know, you could, there are other strategies out there that, you know, are effective in getting the kids to eat the vegetables, such as providing sauces and dips with them. So, you know, providing a dip that the children like to, you know, to eat the vegetable, you know, alongside. So different strategies like this will get children to start to consume vegetables.
Okay, thanks for that. Phillips asks, are there fruits and vegetables that spike the blood sugar level in children and adults? And if so, how do we know which ones and how to avoid them, especially when your child likes them? So are there any particular fruits and vegetables which are more likely to cause a sort of blood sugar spike that you should try and avoid?
My short answer to this is no. I think the avoidance of fruits comes from the anti-carbohydrate brigade, which is something that I find slightly intolerable. Works at clinical levels for some populations, but absolutely no. A fruit is always better than a high energy dense chocolate bar or a bag of crisps. So no, I wouldn't avoid any fruits. They're good sources of nutrients, of fibre, and way better than any alternative that you're going to offer.
Okay, thanks for that. Kim asks, when you say repeated exposure, how often should that be? What kind of frequency should the same food be offered?
Well, the evidence suggests around 10 times that children will start to learn to like it. And in the systematic review that I mentioned from Chandini Nekitsing, they actually looked at this because in some of our studies we found that after 5 exposures, the children were showing a trajectory that they were going to continue eating it. But for it to be a sustained effect, then around 10 times tends to be sufficient. Some children take longer. You know, I did it with my daughter with apple, uncooked apple. You know, she took around 27 times before she ate anything significant. But yeah, around 10 times and you tend to see an uptake and a liking of the food that you're offering.
Okay, and Mariella asks, what about children with sensory issues? Would you agree that repeated exposure is still the key? And what about the input of other healthcare professionals in these cases, such as psychologists and occupational therapists?
This is not within my remit of research. I don't work with clinical populations, so I'm not actually able to comment on this. It's not ever work that I've done. All the work that we've carried out is within children that don't have any particular diagnosis.
Okay, thanks for that. And then Brigida has a question. How do you manage other people always giving your kids a sweet treat when they fall over or are a bit grumpy? I don't do this, but I have friends that do it with my children, and by the time I've realised they're already eating it. So it's food has come out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it comes back to what we call, you know, using food to soothe and comfort. And actually, you know, it's something that we should really be avoiding because, again, like restriction, it directs attention towards that particular food. So, you know, a cuddle's more effective, I think, than giving sweets. Although, you know, I've had this problem with my daughter when she was at primary school where sweets were given as rewards. You know, we shouldn't be using food as a reward because what, you know, it's that whole thing. And we've got a comment here about you've got to eat your vegetables before you can have your pudding. Well, actually what you're doing there is, okay, you might be getting the child to eat the broccoli or whatever, but you're increasing the importance of the pudding. And so what I would say is, you know, even if children don't eat all the vegetables and they know that there's a dessert there or a pudding or whatever, you know, you could still offer a small amount because you don't want children to switch attention and importance away from one food to another.
Okay, thanks for that, Sam. I think that's all the questions, and that does bring us to just after 2 o'clock as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today. The session has been recorded, so we will be able to send you the link